I am so glad you're here. Welcome, welcome. I'm your host, Catherine Duca, and you're listening to Who Do You Think You Are? A podcast to help you learn how to have the highest regard for yourself, how to live from a place of self respect and self love, and how to make yourself a priority in your own life. Meet me here each week for curated tips and strategies designed to help you drop your psychological masks, connect with your truest essence, and simply live life more easily. Because we all know that when we approach life in this way, we naturally, we naturally have more room, more generosity, and more love for one another. And not only is that a beautiful thing, but when have we needed it more than we need it today? Friends, has this been the longest month since we met last Sunday? It has been for me. So much has happened. Some very heartbreaking things have happened. Some joyous things have happened. And I know there's been things in between, but how's everybody doing? How are you doing? I know that I have to say that I'm feeling heavy-hearted tonight. I'm feeling heavy-hearted from the events of the week, and I'm trying to navigate my way through. I am trying not to let the externals of the world change who I am. I'm trying to be grounded in who I am and what I believe. But, you know, it's gotten a little turbulent. So tonight I'm going to talk about vulnerability, the paradox of vulnerability. And I may be a little bit all over the map tonight because I have a lot to say. The events of the week have really brought me to deep reflections, actually, on vulnerability. The events in the news, as well as just, you know, living life and listening to my clients as they navigate their lives. And so vulnerability came up for me very strongly. But I want to begin with the some of the heartbreak that some of you, perhaps many of you, may be experiencing tonight. I know my clients were talking about this all week, and as I said, I'm very aware of how my heart feels tonight. So I wanted to begin with the plane crash in DC, not to get into the details, and the plane crash that happened a day or two later in Pennsylvania. In my email this morning, I titled it "A Plane Full of Hope," because in both cases, on both planes, there was an enormous amount of hope and possibility and goodwill. Of course, the plane that went down in the Potomac was carrying, as I'm sure you know, it was carrying a group of people who were prominent, up-and-coming athletes in the ice skating world. There were union workers. There were bright lights in all walks of life. And then, of course, in the plane crash in Pennsylvania, there was a young girl who had just come through a difficult and challenging operation, and she was recovering and on her way back to Mexico, I believe. And her mom was with her and a crew, and that plane went down, and no survivors in that plane, as in the DC plane, and there was a fatality. That at least I heard of one on the ground. So an enormous experience, both of these things. And it got me thinking, It got me thinking about grief because I realized, as we have done so many times in our lifetime, but it just really struck me this time that we're grieving for people whom we don't know. Has that ever crossed your mind? We're grieving for strangers, and we're grieving hard in many cases. And as I said, some hearts are broken, and we don't even know these individuals. And I began to reflect on the reason for that. You know, the empathy that we feel for strangers can be an interesting experience. It can be a complex experience. It can even be perhaps a bit confusing. Why do I feel so deeply for people I don't know? Sure, it's sad, but this is really under my skin. I heard that from a few people this week. There's a type of grief, and I think it's interesting. It's called vicarious grief. And that's when we grieve through the eyes of another, even though we've never met. And the reasons for that are several. Number one, our shared humanity, of course. We are all part of a global family, a national family. And we are one another's brothers and sisters. And so we grieve for our family members. We have empathy because they're but before the grace of God. You know, it's like not only do we resonate with the pain, because as human beings, we are in touch with other people's pain, but because there's an aspect of grief that comes through us that says, wow, that could have been me in that situation. That could have been me. And that can really ignite our own grief response. And if we've had losses in our lives, and who hasn't, in particular, if we have unresolved grief, something like this can just reawaken all of that for us. And so we end up actually in touch with pain from two sides. Pain of the people we're watching and learning about on the news, on our screens, and we're grieving for ourselves at the same time. So if you find yourself struggling with grief and vulnerability on this day, I hope that this conversation can begin to lend some guidance and hopefully some comfort. So as we get underway, let us call to mind the victims of both crashes and their families. Let us be mindful of the bright lights that each person was, how loved they were, how much they loved, their capacity for passion and for excitement. Let's hold all of that in our hearts tonight. You know, this business about feeling vulnerable along with grieving. You can't grieve unless you feel vulnerable. And vulnerability is, I think, the gateway to grieving. And I began to ask myself, what is it about vulnerability that many of us run from? So I thought the first thing I should do is look up the definition of vulnerable. And I'll tell you, I was a little surprised to hear what the dictionary had to say, though you probably won't be, but I'll tell you why I was surprised. First of all, the definition is being open or susceptible to attack or harm. Being open or susceptible to attack or harm. Well, who wants to do that? Risk being emotionally hurt. Allowing one's weaknesses to be shown or revealed. Well, if that's the definition of vulnerability, if that's the connotation, who in their right mind would voluntarily walk in to that kind of experience, right? It sounds like we should be doing everything to go in the opposite direction. But I would like to submit an alternate definition. And I said I was surprised by this because the world that I live in, the world of psychology and introspection and deep personal growth, would have us hold vulnerability in a completely different light. So I think vulnerability has to do with willingness. Willingness, that's such a strong word, isn't it? Willingness. Willingness to feel whatever we feel inside relative to something that is going on in our lives, something that impacts us. It is the willingness to experience the reaction to that, the emotional reaction to that. So as we go deeper into vulnerability, I am going to hold this dictionary one and kind of do a double dutch with my own definition. Because if we feel that going into our deep selves and feeling what we feel, if we feel that that in any way will leave us open to attack, we're not going to do it. And of course, who is the person most likely to attack ourselves for feeling and experiencing something that doesn't look strong or doesn't look in charge? We have to worry about ourselves. We have to worry about our own judgment. Because I think what we do is we have this kind of what I'm beginning to look at as almost an autoimmune type of response to what we feel inside. We attack ourselves for feeling, what's the word? Less than being in control, less than being in charge, less than necessarily knowing what to do. Many of us, when we get into that space, we ricochet from it like our lives depend on it, because I think we feel they do. We bounce off of the emotionality of our vulnerability, and we go up into our heads and we intellectualize and we rationalize, right? And we ruminate and we problem solve and we try to change the outer circumstance. There are times when we have to change the outer circumstance, but really it begins with changing our own relationship to how we feel about what's happening. If we hate what's happening in ourselves, if we abhor what we feel in ourselves, if we feel frightened or worried or unsure or unsteady, and we hate that feeling and we reject it, we are rejecting ourselves, don't you think? Some would even go as far as to say we're abandoning ourselves. You know, it's bad enough that we may have felt abandoned early on in life in certain ways, emotionally abandoned, emotionally neglected. But then what do we do when we come in contact with this experience? We, in a sense, abandon ourselves. We stop tending to ourselves. We stop understanding ourselves. We stop comforting ourselves. And we say, I have to buck up. That drill sergeant that we spoke of last week. We need more kindergarten teachers in our head, less drill sergeants. So our own vulnerability has to do with a willingness to feel, a willingness to explore, a willingness to lean into the truth of what we feel. Because our vulnerability is simply a reaction to something. It's true, it's genuine. So I invite you for the duration of this conversation to suspend the dictionary version of vulnerability and instead adopt the one I'm suggesting here, because it has to do with the heart of our relationship to ourselves, which, as I said last time, is the most important relationship we have. It is the one that underlies all others, and it underlies everything we do. I notice a comment just came in from Leandra. Leandra, welcome. And you're welcome. Thank you so much, Catherine, for feeling too much. I'm not sure if there was a part of that sentence, Leandra, that got cut off, but sometimes we can feel like our emotions are just too big. We feel they're too big when we never had help and we were never taught what to do with big feelings. I think, many of us were given the message, because they're too big, tamp them down, make them go away, cheer up, look on the bright side, go and have some chocolate cake. Okay, so big feelings, but feelings are feelings. Feelings are feelings. They're important. They are integral to who we are. They guide us, steer us, open us up, help us touch others. But at the same time, they're just feelings. They're just sensations in our body. And if we can learn not to panic when we feel these sensations, when we get these cues, but instead trust that if we're there for ourselves, we'll get through them. We'll be okay. Our feelings cannot, this may sound radical, our feelings cannot hurt us, though we're afraid because we think they can. Sure, we can feel disappointed. We can feel upset. We can feel angry. We can feel downhearted, brokenhearted. Yes, that's what being a human being with a personality is all about. But we don't have to halt. We don't have to judge. We don't have to get out of what we feel or twist ourselves into a pretzel to not feel what we already feel. Because as we've said so many times here, when we reach for outside pleasures to extinguish what we feel, we then have two problems. The original feeling doesn't go away, and now we have the thing that we're doing too much of. And I see Patricia. Welcome. What if it doesn't feel like there is a bright side? Yeah, well, sometimes the look on the bright side is, I'm all for optimism, but sometimes looking on the bright side is a way of pouring kind of pink Pepto-Bismol over the real thing. Now, when there's no bright side, that may be in the external circumstance. There's no bright side. We may feel hopeless. We may feel powerless. We may feel, Patricia, like, what good is our voice? One voice, what's that going to do? But if we let the appearance of darkness change who we are and shut us down and make us go dead inside, then what are we allowing? So I think the key is, even if the external situation has the appearance of darkness, and let's look at the plane crashes. That's pretty dark. That's pretty devastating. Those losses are permanent. on this plane. So the bright side is not going to come from those beautiful souls coming back on this plane in the way in which we knew them. But that doesn't mean we can't go in search of light, of the light of comfort, the light of love. And I believe so strongly in the depths of my being, the light that comes from, I don't have an answer. My heart is shattered, but I will stay with you. I will stay with you. I will keep you company. I will hold your hand, or I will stay connected and hold your hand in consciousness. I don't know if we want to call that a bright light, but that is entering the darkness, not leaving someone there by themselves. And when we feel dark, if we can reach out to another and ask for company, not for someone to step in and remedy whatever is causing us pain, but to keep us company, to be a witness. I think witnessing is so very important. There was joy this week. In part, some of the hostages were returned home. I mean, a double edge. I mean, joy beyond joy, of course, but also shed a light on the hostages that are never coming home. See, everything has a duality. Everything is two-sided. Everything has light and dark. Speaking of the hostages, what has struck me so deeply, I wonder if it has struck any of you, is that the love, the parents, the families, the friends who've lost loved ones, whose hostages, family members were hostages that were murdered, they haven't turned away. They haven't turned their back on the other members of their, family, larger family. So when we stay present in the darkness, either to ourselves or to one another, we're doing an amazing thing. We're staying alive. And we are refusing to let our light be extinguished. And so that is vulnerability. That's not rush in and rearrange the furniture and make a new thing. That is a fervent willingness to accompany, to stand in our vulnerability, to stand in the, I don't know what to do, but I'm not leaving you. I don't have an answer, but I'm not going to, in my discomfort of not having an answer, disappear. Now, I want to be clear about something. This is not easy. I don't think it's easy. It's not easy for me. And as I said at the top of the show, I myself am feeling vulnerable. I'm feeling kind of shaky. I'm feeling sad. I feel a sensation in my heart. I am profoundly upset. And so, I'm a little wobbly. But I remind myself that I know what I know. And this is what I know. And you may know something else that keeps you grounded, keeps you centered. I invite you to contribute so that we can all, in this small, but as someone said today, small but growing and deepening community we have here, support one another, uplift one another, and say, I'll keep you company here. I've got you. Not a light-hearted subject by any means. And I started to look at some questions in the chat. I'll go back. So Patricia, with the bright side, I hope that I began to speak to that. If you have a part 2, don't hesitate. Still Bill? Here you go, Bill. Here you go. Thinking it is the end of the world has not so far proved to be correct. Well, that's true. That's true. One of the things we do in um, our perhaps fear of vulnerability is, and actually at the same time it creates an amplification of our vulnerable feeling, is rushing into the future. And you know um, all the what ifs. What if this happens, then what if that happens, and what if, there's no end to what if thinking. There's no end. What if to infinity? And of course, we'll run out of answers. So, Bill, I think what you're saying here, the it has not proved to be the end of the world. So when that thought enters our consciousness, let's do a reality check. Yes, things are happening. Yes, things are moving. Absolutely. We're not going to delude ourselves. But is it quite to the level that we're picturing in our minds? Because if it isn't, then what's called for is a redirection and a recalibration back to the present moment. Okay, in this moment, this, and this is happening. And that's enough to deal with. But it's not quite that which I'm envisioning, which I'm terrified of. So, Bill, I think the bottom line there is try to be as much in the present as possible. Thank you. Dawn, I found myself crying this week, some of it for myself, some for those who lost their lives or who experienced those tragic losses, and for all those suffering in our country and the world, a needed release. I found myself crying this week for myself and for others who lost their lives or experienced the losses. That's what being vulnerable is. It is, I'm going to use a word. I could tell you one thing, my clients don't like it when I introduce this word, but I think eventually it's better. Surrender. Surrender has another connotation. I'm not even going to look that one up. That probably, will come back, waving a white flag, surrendering, lying down, being in a state of defeat. But that's not what we mean here. To be vulnerable is to cry sometimes. And the crying is it's a release, as Dawn is saying. It is a declaration. It is, I'm going to say, it's honoring the reality of a situation. How in the world are we supposed to feel with some of the things that are going on in the world right now? Some of the things that would challenge anyone's understanding of humanistic. How are we supposed to feel? People are in such darkness. They are so removed from any sense of connection to a higher self that they are overcome with inhumane thoughts and behaviors and cruelty. How are we supposed to feel? How could we not let our hearts break? The problem is when we say, I can't do that, I can't do that, I mustn't do that, because it's weak, because it's unproductive. It's the opposite. And when we give in, I need a better word, when we acknowledge and step into and let that wave wash over us, like the wave in the ocean, when we stand sideways, it passes over us. And we're not scrambling. We're not beating ourselves up. We're not in judgment. We're not autoimmuning on ourselves, attacking ourselves. We are accepting the reality of how we feel. We don't have to like it. How could you like some of the things that are going on? It's not about liking it. It's about being able to tolerate the truth. Again, I'll say it 100 times, because no one should feel inadequate if they can't do that or do it consistently. I think it's appropriate to move in and out of this mental space, take a rest, reconstitute ourselves, rest, eat, sleep, talk with friends, probably the best thing we can do when we feel we're in a prolonged state of vulnerability and we can't get out. Help somebody who feels as badly as you do, maybe for different reasons. Let's get out of ourselves. Let's tend and minister to someone else. That is probably the best antidote, if you can't take it, to relieve some of the pressure without going into denial and without shutting down. I had a therapist many years ago, a wonderful therapist. And he said to me, Kathy, when you're feeling, because I think I was saying, I feel so shut down. I feel so closed off. My heart is closed. And he gave me a simple piece of advice. I never forgot it. He said, Kathy, when you go out today, whatever you do, when you're at 7-Eleven getting your coffee, look someone in the eye. Look someone in the eye. When you say thank you, have a nice day, don't make it rote. Look them in the eye. And for a split second, try to see them. Try to see them. And place yourself in a position to be seen. And I remember the next day I found myself, I know exactly where I was. I was in a little hot dog place. I used to eat hot dogs in those days. I used to sell them, actually. But let's not talk about my guilt. And I was standing there waiting online for my order, and I thought about what he said, because I felt like a mannequin. I remember distinctly. I felt so disconnected from everything around me. Oh, Michael said, look in somebody's eyes. And so I did. And you know what it did? I can't even explain it. I came alive. I came alive. Nothing like profoundly swirled in my brain, but where I was shut down and closed off and walled off and alone, I made contact with someone at the hot dog place for a split second. And then I did it again and again and again. And I have to say, one of the pleasures of my life, I love to look people in the eye. And I love, I'm at my screen many hours each day, sometimes, I don't know, whatever, 8 hours or so. And I love the intensity of looking people in the eye. It's not a stare. It's just a being present. I love that because I like to think I'm giving something, my presence, but I can tell you I am getting a whole lot back. It's connection. And that saves me. And so I offer this in case it can do the same for you. So yeah, Dawn, crying is an expression of our vulnerability and our love. And we wouldn't cry unless we felt love deeply, unless we felt a connection to humanity deeply. We wouldn't be crying. Janine says, this feels so healing right now. Oh, I am so glad for that. I'm so glad for that. Thank you for letting me know. Again, Dawn, turn our fear toward care, not chaos. I can't really read that. Chase, can't really read that. Perhaps it can come on the screen. Turn our fear. I'm not sure what that is, but I think I get the point. Turn our fear toward care, not chaos. And I mentioned last week that it's ironic to use that metaphor, but I'm into it now, so I have to say it. The aerial view of what we're doing. Notice when we're scrambling, Let's notice when we are just kind of, scurrying around trying to do before we are being. Who do we want to be? That's really the question before we can get to what do we want to do? Who do we want to be? And I'll bet you want to be an anchor, both for yourself and for others. I bet you want to be a steady presence. From that wellspring of presence will come what to do, not the other way around. So, Dawn, looking someone in the eye was antidoting. You're being shut down. Yes, it was. Yes, it was. Still, Bill, helping and caring for others is the bright side that Patricia was looking for. Thank you so much. Helping and caring for others is the bright side. Enough said. That's it. That's it. So, there you have it. There you have it. One of the questions I was going to read tonight, well, I guess I can read it. We've sort of touched on it, but I'm worried. This is Emily from Chicago. I'm worried that if I become more vulnerable, I'll lose my sense of control and security. How can I balance being open and vulnerable with taking care of myself and staying safe? I think, and I hope this conversation spoke to that, Emily. You don't lose your sense of control. You gain more control. There's control and there's control. There's the appearance of control, which is being controlling, trying to stop a wave from coming. And then there's the self-control. I know what I'm going to do. I'm going to turn sideways and let the wave wash over me. Or if I have skills, I may go under it. But I'm not going to try to stop it. Now, that is not to say at all not taking right action, because I believe at this time what is called for is community, is enough people taking right action, joining communities, joining groups that are, that are made up of people who are centering themselves just as we're doing tonight. And from that centering are planning to take action or are taking action now. So this is not about doing nothing. Absolutely not. But when you know who you really are, not who you think you are, because who you think you are is I gotta solve this. I have to make this problem go away. But who you really are is someone who in the darkness or in the midst of the storm can find your center, find your voice, find your light, and make your contribution. Even if, especially if it's, as Bill says, caring for others, as Dawn says, going from the chaos to the caring. That's the power that each of us has. And it doesn't happen by accident, and it doesn't happen without us. It happens with our deliberate creation, and it happens as a result of our deliberate creation. It doesn't happen willy-nilly. It's not automatic. And if we choose to live on automatic pilot, this depth will not be attained. We must go in pursuit of it, which is to say, in pursuit of our deepest selves, the self that is connected to something larger than ourselves, the self that is connected to one another. Namaste, the highest in me acknowledges the highest in you. So, this is a lot to ponder. This is a lot to digest. Let's do that this week. Thank you so much for your time tonight, for listening. Let's hold each other in the highest regard. Let's know that some of us are feeling all the ways we talked about tonight. And let's just stay in tune with that. Let's stay in touch with that. This doesn't mean we can't laugh. This doesn't mean we can't enjoy the company of somebody. This doesn't mean we don't have other pursuits. Of course we do. But let us be holistic in our stance and in our approach. And let's hold each other mentally, spiritually, in the highest regard. With that, dear friends, I wish you well. I wish you a good night. As I always say at the close of the show, let yourself have a good night's sleep tonight. I know all this is going on, but chances are these challenges will be there in the morning. Let's address them when we're fresh. For tonight, let's drift off in the conscious connection that we are family. We are family. And we are one another's mirrors. So with that, dear friends, thank you. I wish you well. You've been listening to Who Do You Think You Are? I'm your host, Catherine Duca. I wish you a very good night.